emails that are urgent, and I don't answer them, but I've set parameters around what I will and will not do. And
so you just let them sit there. You're the chief information officer, and you're not giving out information in the middle of the night when someone's sending urgent. I feel like you're going to be looking for a job soon.
No, I think even with clients, when you set those boundaries and expectations, they respect that. It's surprising how much.
I agree. You agree with that?
I agree. Yes, you have to set boundaries. Yes, but also I think one aspect of this is also getting enough sleep. I think you need to get sleep in order to function during the day. And if you're getting emails at 2 o'clock in the morning, stressing yourself out, trying to respond to
why are you reading your phone at 2 o'clock in the morning? I mean, mine is not on my bedstand. I purposely keep it somewhere else.
Well, I think that's part of the conversation.
Here's why I think it's a good idea to turn it off. I'm thinking back to the financial collapse. I was at an anniversary reception for a couple on the Sunday that we all got to come in, Citigroup's going down. So that was a day where you need to be on the BlackBerry. But if it's really important and the BlackBerry's off, they'll call you. I mean, telephones still work, and there are ways to get hold of people when it's truly urgent, because urgent has to be urgent.
Right. I mean, this is about employers setting the tone, because there's always going to be someone at work. You may set your own boundaries, but there's going to be someone else who's more available, and I'm sorry to tell you, it's going to hopscotch you eventually by virtue of being more available. So is it up to the company to set the tone? I mean, Volkswagen, for example, is turning off some employees' emails 30 minutes after their shift ends. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea for them to be so absolute? You think it's a good idea?
I think it's a good idea too.
Because the person who's getting the rest and is going to be more, ready for the business world when necessary is the person who's actually
and it's a company-wide policy. If they're implementing that policy, and everyone's email shuts off as soon as their shift is over, then it's...
But doesn't it lead to a fire drill when it comes back on? I mean, for me, if I sit there on Sunday night and I go through and I'm looking at the next day and I send a few emails to set it up for the next day, here's what we need to do, or you respond to a few things, you get a jump start on the day, it's not an emergency.
The fact that these organizations are mandating it is silly. It's just so silly because they don't get that they're going with a good idea. The concept's great, right? Let's set boundaries.
What's a better way to do it?
Better way to do it is go and lead by example, right? So let's not email our employees, or let's not put urgent on the email we send to our employees after business hours, right? Let's set the tone. Let's set the tone as the manager of not responding to emails after hours.
I feel like Ty's point is right. The urgency is like the boy that cries wolf. Every single email is urgent, and when there really is an urgent situation, no one's going to want to pick up, or no one's going to want to respond.
But isn't it up to you as an adult and as an employee to sort through what is and isn't urgent? I mean, I always feel like if I email someone and they're like, I was, here, and I got this email from you, you're like, I don't know what you're doing. You check your Berry or iPhone, your device, when it's right for you. I mean, you set your own boundaries. It's not my fault for emailing you.
Let's all the flip side. Okay, let's say you're the Volkswagen, because I'm the car nuts. Let's bring the cars in. Let's say you're a Volkswagen employee and there's an engineer who's, you're starting up the line. There's going to be an issue on Monday. It's Saturday. You need to get hold of the person.
Yeah.
What are your options if the BlackBerry's turned off? You pick up the phone.
Or
you go that personal email.
But I don't have another phone. I don't have a landline. If my BlackBerry's off, there's no way to get me. I don't have another phone.
And let's be honest.
There's no way?
No. I mean, you can come over to my house, I guess, if you know where I live. But other than that, we don't have a landline. There's no other way to get me.
I mean, can't you get in touch with them via your email on your computer? I mean, if that was
a true urgent issue?
My boss email, actually. It only comes to my BlackBerry. I'm realizing now that all of this.
I know, I could not.
This is it. This is the only way for work to get me. So there you go.
If you think 95% of all email is not urgent. Whether you think it is or not, it's not urgent.
That's right. That's a great point to end on. You're right about that. Thanks, guys. Good job. Up next.
All right, so hopefully that's got your creative juices flowing a little bit. So quick introductions.
The price of oil is flirting with $79 a barrel, which means a price for regular at the pump is cheaper than a gallon of milk for the first time in 4 years. According
Can everyone hear me in the back? Hopefully, yes, not a big room here. Introductions, my name is Hamera Mokhtarzada. I'm a Foreign Service Officer. I'm also one of the state reps on the AFSA board. We're joined today by Matthew Asada, who is the state VP to AFSA. On my far right, we have Daryl Miss, who is Health and Wellness Program Manager with our Med Unit. Joel Wisner is with IRM. He's a Strategic Communications Advisor. Guy representing today. And we have Jacqueline Ridley, who is a senior human resources specialist. She's also our in-house expert on compensation issues. I want to thank all of you for coming out. We got a tremendous amount of feedback from folks all over the world, from so many posts when they saw the announcement on this issue. So I think it really shows that the timing of this discussion is right. And so we're hoping that this is the beginning of a conversation amongst our membership here in Washington, out in the field, and with the department to try to come up with some positive solutions to managing what is becoming really an increasing drain on our workforce. I'm going to turn it over now to Matthew Osada, who's going to talk a little bit about APSA's interests in these issues.
Great. And I think I'm just going to grab the microphone just so that people can hear us from the back in case we're not projecting loud enough. Is that on? Or will be shortly. What we wanted to do is, again, just from APSA's perspective, as a professional association and union for the Foreign Service, is to start this conversation, is to start this discussion. We had a lot of feedback from people, on all sides of this issue. Some saying that, hey, we need to have a strict policy on this. Some saying that, no, you need to let supervisors have the discretion to be able to set those standards and guidelines for their employees. What the APSA Governing Board did last November 2013, when it approved its strategic plan with 5 priorities, one of those was to look at the quality of work life here in the Foreign Service. And actually one of those sub-items, and I'll just read it out, support flexible work arrangements, including telework and midday flex time, and the development of after-hours guidelines on employee accessibility. So we wanted to take a look at what could be in place, what supervisors, managers, employees themselves could look to help to structure their individual workday. We know that, again, the work that we've all signed up for, serving overseas or here at the department, whether in the Foreign Service or Civil Service, there are going to be times when after-hours work is necessary. There are going to be times, whether you're the duty officer, the duty communicator, you have to go in, wake somebody up, get them to come into the embassy or consulate. There may be times when you have weekend duty here at the department, but there are ways to ameliorate the demand and the impact on employees. You cannot have employees going 24/7 for a continued period of time without burnout. And we see this and we hear about this in some of FSI's courses as they teach about crisis response or doing diplomacy in high threat post. So all of this is part of a kind of a holistic conversation, building resilience in the Foreign Service, in the Civil Service, to be able to deal with situations as they come up. I think APSA is in a unique position given that we represent all of our Foreign Service employees from all of our agencies. So we're trying to bring in perspectives from USAID, state, foreign commercial, foreign agricultural service, and respectful of, again, the demands overseas and then the demands here at home. So given that kind of as a framework, what we're hoping to do is really come up with some solutions from this conversation as a kickoff point. And yes, we do look at it perhaps from more of an employee perspective. I mean, at the end of the day, we are the union, looking at ensuring that employees' rights are respected, that employees are compensated for when they have to work. But I think a lot of this, we're all professionals in this business. We understand that we, without creating binding restrictions, need to have something in place that supervisors, individuals can point to deal with some of the issues that you heard being discussed in the video from Fox. And I think that, yes, we chose Fox deliberately because this is a conversation that has a business impact, that has kind of bipartisan support to take a look at some of these issues. It's not a Democratic, Republican issue. I know we're on election day, but this is really something for overall workforce development, whether it's in the private or in the public sector. So I kind of just wanted to kick it off with that, and we'll be coming back to some of our panelists here to talk about some of these individual items there on the board?
So I have to say that I have been guilty of thinking that because of the nature of our work, the demands of being available were unique to us. And I was proved wrong as I started looking into the research. According to the American Psychological Association, 44% of working adults check their email daily while they're on vacation. About 1 in 10 of those actually admit to doing it hourly. 38% are checking emails at the dinner table. We've all done that, right? And I think the most profound intrusion into our personal time and personal space is taking your BlackBerry, your device, into bed with you. How many of you have ever checked email, work emails in bed? Yeah, me too. And we're not alone. About 50% of those surveyed said the same. So what does this all add up to? Well, about 60% of our workforce is saying that they're spending more than 13 hours a day plugged in. And over the span of a year, that adds up to about a month and a half of overtime. So and the cumulative effect of all of this, of course, is not good. So I'm going to actually hand it over now to Daryl, who's going to talk about why it's not good.
So I've come in today prepared to talk a little bit about stress. And stress kind of gets a bad reputation. When we hear about stress, there's kind of this, ooh, that's a bad thing, we should try to avoid that with all possibility. But my background is actually in, my undergraduate degree is actually in physical education, where we know that stress is actually a really good thing. We know that small amounts of stress applied incrementally to skeletal and cardiac muscle actually helps it improve. But the key point to that is that adaptation actually occurs during rest. So it's not the stress itself that's the good thing, it's our adaptation to it. And so think about that for a minute as I talk just a little bit about the research associated with stress. So when you look at the research, they talk specifically about work stress. And there's this other component of work stress that's called rumination. And rumination is defined specifically as a repeated or chronic activation of the cognitive representation of stress-related content. So when I read that definition, I think about my grandma who used to tell me, don't just sit there and stew about something, it's not going to do you any good. And that's exactly what rumination is. It's us continuing to think about the things that, or the activities that stressed us out during the day. And when we have that rumination, it affects our health in a negative way. So the research has looked at rumination and heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is actually a way that we can clinically look at our cardiovascular health. And when we are stressed, our heart rate increases a little bit. Sometimes it increases a lot. But the fact is that when you're stressed over a long period of time, your heart rate stays up just a little bit higher. And when your heart rate is a little bit higher, it doesn't tend to fluctuate as much. So that becomes the physical way that we can actually measure that. So what the research tells us is that the more that somebody has rumination or continued stress, the more active their heart is, and that's not good for us over a long period of time. Because remember, the only time stress is good for us is when we are able to overcome it. So the research also looks at rumination and sleep quality. And I bet you can probably guess what the relationship there is. The more we're thinking about our stress and continuing to kind of stew on it, our quality of sleep and our quantity of sleep actually goes down. The research also talks a little bit about the idea of weekend recovery. It suggests there needs to be an extended period of time throughout the week where it's more than just 8 or 10 hours of getting away from the stress that affects us. Research supports the importance of weekend activities and experiences for well-being and job performance. It's good for us to be able to step away from that for an extended period of time. So you can understand then how this technology that we have basically always turns us on and always elicits that rumination. And that's problematic for us. We know that rest is actually turning off the rumination, and it's critical for recovery from work stress. And actually has been defined as the most critical natural period for psychological and somatic restorative processes. Basically, it's the way we're supposed to do it. We shouldn't have to take medications to be able to do it. You know, it's a natural process that should go there. So in addition to talking about stress and kind of how bad it is for us and the research that is behind it, I've also been very involved in the last few months with work-life wellness processes from literally the very highest office of the presidency down through our organization. And in July there was a summit at the White House that looked at working families, and out of that came a memo from the president. And this is important for us to think about. This White House memo instructs agencies to incorporate work-life wellness considerations into the way that we do business. It gives employees the rights to request flexibilities without fear of retribution. It's really important. In addition, it requires supervisors to provide a response to that request in a timely manner. And timely manner is actually defined in that, and I don't want to guess at what that is. I read it a couple of weeks ago, but I don't remember exactly what that time is. Just in the last couple of weeks, the Secretary of State voiced his support for department-wide work-life wellness flexibility. And then the Deputy Secretary for Management and Resources also voiced that same support and has talked about her focus on carrying out programs and policies designed to try and enhance work-life and wellness capabilities within the department. So from a very high level, that support is here to help fix problems just like these. I think that's what we're coming together to try and talk about today.
Great. Thanks, Daryl. So we heard about some of the solutions that the private sector is implementing to deal with this problem. They're not alone. Governments are also taking a look at this, as Daryl mentioned. In France, there's a national law that requires employees to turn off their mobile devices after they leave work, after 6 p.m., I believe. In Brazil, if you are working on your mobile device after working hours, you can actually bill overtime. In Germany, the labor minister is actually looking at a national law that would define parameters, and we're likely to see movement on that front in 2015. And there's even a lawsuit here in the United States brought by police officers who believe that they should be compensated for working beyond their normal duty hours. So it's an issue that's gaining momentum. So again, with the idea that today's discussion ought to be focused on solutions and proactive ideas. We're going to turn now to what will hopefully be a discussion. We invite your comments as well. And we're going to look at 3 areas specifically. So technology and technological solutions, guidelines and expectations. This falls on the employee. And then best practices for supervisors.
So this session is being recorded and will be shared with our membership a little bit later around the world for those that weren't able to join us today. And I think one of the things that Humaira pointed out is that we are actually in a pretty interesting position, you know, representing the United States overseas, because it's going to be our economic officers, our labor officers, that are going to be reporting on actually the countries, Germany, France, Brazil, and how they are addressing this issue. So not only are we looking at it from a how does this impact us as a service, as employees, but we're also saying like, well, how is it impacting the competitiveness of our nation? What are other nations doing to address these things? So I just kind of want to keep that global context in mind, because for us, in our profession, it's not just a theoretical, it's an actual about how we're doing business. So we passed out 2 articles at the back of the room. One was, Ending the Tyranny of 24/7 Email, appeared in the New York Times back at the end of August, right before Labor Day. And the other one that appeared in the last month, October 18th, Trying to Live in the Moment and Not on the Phone. And the first step, again, without any problem, is first a recognition that there is a problem, that there is an issue. How much time are you spending on your BlackBerry, on your iPhone? It's really hard for us today to know that. There's nothing that the department has installed to be able to tell you that. There's nothing available that tells you how many of those hours were after hours. And so this New York Times article is very interesting because it actually suggests 2 apps. And these are iPhone apps, iPad apps, unfortunately not BlackBerry apps, but we know that the department is moving to support multiple platforms. But these 2 apps are Moment and Checky. And I don't know if any of you have these on your iPhones today. Does anyone in the audience have or use these apps? So the Moment will actually capture how much screen time you're using and for the device. Checky captures how many times you check it. Flick the thing on. And these 2 apps we would encourage employees to take a look at and consider. They can download these to their personal devices. Right now they can download these to their official devices. It may change in the future when the department rolls out an official app policy, but right now that does not exist. So this is one way of just getting a better sense. You saw the numbers that Humaira put up there. How are you using your device? How much of your personal time is being taken away right now? And again, getting a sense of that is really important. What we probably want to do as we move forward, we would encourage the department to kind of think about putting these devices on people's phones, people on their devices themselves, but also modifying it. So you could say, hey, my standard workday is 8 to 5. And then it would be able to technologically segment out your time after hours checking, after hours use, compared to during hours checking, during hours use. Again, without going to what that means, without going to whether there should be compensation, just getting a sense of how much usage there is. So it's kind of one of the technological solutions we want to throw out there. I have 2 more things I want to leave you with and then turn it over to one of our IT professionals here in the service, within IRM. And it's something that I learned from one of my previous bosses, that, again, going to what Daryl had mentioned about interruption, is that how many of you have disabled the vibrate function for your BlackBerry? 1 person, 3, 4, 5, okay? Maybe about a third. So again, that you're not interrupted every time that you get a new message. How many people have also disabled the red light, the blinking red light? A lot less, maybe 2. Those are 2 best practices that I saw, again, my department principal using, that he said, guess what? I'm going to disable the red light. I'm going to disable the vibrate. I'm going to set my own times. I am going to drive it as to when I choose to check this device. And I think that's a small step. It's a very easy step. And what we've encouraged, again, IRM, is to produce instructions. So how can employees quickly do that? Because not everyone knows actually where on the BlackBerry or the iPhone you go to disable the automatic notifications. But it's an easy, simple step that will regain some of your peace of mind. And with that, I want to turn it over to our IRM colleague here, and then maybe again get some feedback from the audience here on this issue of technology. Because each one of these, again, we're trying to spend some time on technology, guidelines, expectations, and then best practices.
Thanks. Thanks, Matthew. I'm really glad to see everybody here today to talk about this topic, because this is a thing that I think IRM, as the IT Bureau, wants to be able to collect feedback from what people directly need to use technology to manage this problem. It's been suggested to me that technology may have caused this problem. I don't know if I agree with that. I think, probably no more than our physiology, as we heard, kind of contributes to this problem. I think of this usually as a disconnect between managers and supervisors in setting the expectations. But I do realize that, the technology is there, and so it's going to be used how it's used, and that's a thing that we have to live with as a reality. So I'm here today to make it clear that, IRM as the IT Bureau is listening to what's needed to help technology contribute as a solution to this problem. I don't think technology can solve it alone. I'm one of you. I'm a Foreign Service member of the Foreign Service for the past 15 years. Been overseas, issued these devices out to people, and it's not lost on me the irony of people coming to me, begging to be shackled with a mobile device. Please free me from my desk, but I need to be in constant contact. So that seems to be like a decision that's not happening, a discussion that's not happening between supervisors and their employees to set those expectations. As an example, here my office director domestically uses a weekly stand-up all-hands meeting to reiterate on a regular basis what those expectations are for him, for his managers. He says, I might send you crazy things. This is one of the items from one of the articles. I might send you a crazy idea at 11 p.m. at night, and I don't expect a response. That's just a placeholder for the next business day or the next chance we have to talk. If I need to reach you, it's going to say urgent. I do expect you to check on the weekend once or twice because, we have serious, critical events that can happen, but I don't expect you to expend mental energy responding to a thing this is clearly marked. And so setting an expectation like that, at least for me, has been very helpful. I do want to say, Matthew's completely right that it's our role to be technology advisors and to help people understand the ways to use these smarter devices that we're making available, including the newer Blackberries, if you've heard of the BlackBerry 10, Z10, Q10 series. Here's one right here. It looks a lot more like an Android or an iPhone. These are available today, right now, for you to order and trade in your older style BlackBerry. So they give you a little bit more freedom with potential commercial apps to download. But what's important is that we're trying to set up some forum for you to ask questions, get good advice, get good information. One of the first things that I would tell people overseas when I would issue these devices is exactly how to do those things. Turn off the vibrate function, turn off those functions that are not helpful to you managing information, that make the device feel like it's managing you. The easiest way to find this information is if you're on OpenNet, go to search.state.sbu and type in BlackBerry. And there's a very extensive and actually very nice looking one. My colleagues here in the back from our mobile group. You can find a lot of the frequently asked questions that we've answered over and over again. Some that we've just offered to people that have been proven to be useful in the past about turning on and off some of these functions. And we also recommend people to go into our enterprise social media site, Corridor, to ask these open questions. It can feel like shouting in the dark, but we do that in our personal life sometimes to look for good answers, right? And we have people that are monitoring these groups every day to get good answers, and then to get that out into the broadest possible audience instead of locked away in emails. So I just thought I would start off with that, and if there's any discussion, or if you want to go on to another area.
I had a question, so. Yes.
Sure. Do you want to
One
mark
second,
it?
Dana, can you run the mic down?
Oh, sure.
Is it on technology or?
Yes, it is. So I have a newer BlackBerry, and last time I was at Post, there was a way I could disable my old BlackBerry with a rollerball to make it turn off at 10 o'clock at night and make it turn back on at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pretended that my BlackBerry was totally dysfunctional during those hours when it was shut down. But I can't figure out how to do that on my newer high-tech BlackBerry, so I wondered if it still had that feature.
I don't know if my expert plant in the back has a direct response to that. I believe so. I haven't heard that it was lost, but
Some of them hide in odd venue places, so one of my purposes here today is to write down what you need. I'll get your contact information as we wrap up, and I will get you an answer on that.
yeah, I mean, there will be these detailed questions that we haven't explored in the past, but this gives us the opportunity to do that and to put that out broadly to our frequently asked questions site. You can search BlackBerry again from the main intranet page and find that, and also via the Corridor social networking sites. So we'll get that. We'll get that answer out. Yeah, and good for battery life, right? That's green, right?
I think a lot of people just don't know how to use their Blackberries. The last 3 or 4 posts I've been to, I've been handed a BlackBerry but without any training or guidance, and I sort of stumbled through it and I learned that. But at one post I was at, we did have some sort of training sessions. I think that BlackBerry in the search box is good, but some people are better off with one-on-one live teaching rather than going and looking for things if they're not very tech savvy. So one of the things I would do is to encourage some training rather than just giving people a BlackBerry. And then the second thing is also with Outlook. When you're in Outlook, many people don't know how to use rules, for example. So encourage people to use the technology, but provide training, because many people don't know how to use the technology that they have.
Well, I hear you. There's a huge number of options that go untapped. Some better than others, but both for Outlook and for the BlackBerry, and even now for the new iPhones and iPads that are becoming available. I'll take that back, certainly, but I would also recommend that I believe that every bureau has an executive office with one or more IT-oriented types in it, and that might be a good thing to sort of start, even if it's started as sort of a grassroots, sort of community of practice kind of thing, to start finding those best practices, using the ones that we publish and make available on the website. I believe we have some kind of video type or training type materials on the website if you do search BlackBerry on intranet, but certainly there's more that can be done. So yeah, I take that.
Why don't we get the microphone to the next person? And I just want to put a question out to the audience. What technology do you need or would you like to have to be able to better address this issue of after-hours accessibility? We have a cell phone sometimes, you have a landline, and the next section we'll get into like expectations. How do you actually use the technology? How do you develop those guidelines and expectations from the supervisor themselves? But what is it about technology that we can identify right now that you would like, that you would need, or that you see in other offices or in other companies being used today?
Thanks. Thanks. My name is Greg Art. I work in EAP. And kind of half addressing your question, Matt, but half addressing what the points that the previous questioner was making too. I think Outlook actually is my biggest problem. It's not the BlackBerry. That's changed. In my last overseas posting, my BlackBerry was the bigger problem. But here in Washington, actually, I think the tyranny of email affects me a lot more in the office than it does at home. And perhaps that's just a function of my particular job type. But what I mean specifically is that, over the course of the day, when you take into account 2, and some people may even be looking at 3 different systems, I would guess just on the 2 that I get, it depends on how many emails I send, but I probably get several hundred emails a day. And this gets a little bit into the guidelines and expectations thing, and we can talk maybe a little bit about that later, I guess, but email etiquette and whether or not you send an email to an entire distribution list. But on the technology front itself, I think part of the tyranny of email comes from the fact that we're using email for a lot. We are using email for, I would say, 90-something% of the stuff that we're doing in the department. And we do some phone calls, we do a lot of meetings, which is another thing, but there's some SharePoint here and there and this and that, but really, we're using email for all sorts of stuff. We're using it for conversations, we're using it for clearances, and this is, I think, a real big issue, and gets into the quantity of emails I get a day. I can't tell you how many emails have clearance or clear in the subject line. Because of that, I've actually created a rule, so I have a clearance folder. That helps, but I think on a technology front, it would be great if IRM or another bureau might look into some ways that other similar but different fields are using different technology to address document collaboration, to address supervisor approvals. I know Workshare is one that's been used in the legal field for a very long time, and I think if we could take some of the functions off email, that could really result in fewer emails that I think we have to deal with. And then one final point on just Outlook, along the lines of what we were talking about with the red light and the vibrate. I've disabled sounds and I've disabled the pop-up email notification on Outlook as well, and I find that helps a little bit.
We'll have time to continue sort of discussing broadly, but I do want to cover a little bit on this issue of guidelines and expectations. We heard from an FSO in Bogota, and she writes, I think one of our biggest challenges is the hyper-competitive atmosphere we work in which many people feel like they have to be the first to respond to an email, even if it's at 10 p.m. on a Friday. I think that really encapsulates the culture of the State Department. Another colleague in Monterey wrote, I can tell you what was communicated to me was that employees are to be considered on call 24/7, and they're required to have their phones on their person to answer them at all times. It raises a lot of questions, and I think that there's a certain onus on us as employees in terms of setting boundaries. There's a huge, even more so than the employees, I would argue there's an even larger onus on supervisors to try to set guidelines and parameters for after-hours email usage and availability. But I'm curious what people's experiences have been in various positions in the department on, as an employee, how do you manage expectations of your after-hours accessibility? What kind of a response have you gotten? Has it been good? Has it been positive from your supervisor? Negative? And these are issues that kind of feed into some of the labor relations issues that AFSA is keenly interested in.
Hi, my name is Jessie Huaracayo, and my last job was working in the Office of the Special Envoy Proceeding at South Sudan. That was a very demanding job. I barely survived. But there were no expectations. No one.
Remember, this is being recorded.
It's like this with a few different supervisors. But my bosses were great, and they would say really sweet, encouraging things like, oh, don't work so hard, or make sure you go home on time, or you didn't need to answer that email, that kind of thing. But again, it was, as you were saying, the volume of emails is so much that if you get something on a Friday night and you don't respond, it's gone by Monday morning. There's no way that you're ever going to pay attention to it. So in order to just keep up, we had to do work on the weekends and at all hours of the day and night. Plus the time zone issue, I don't know exactly how to address that, but the best time to reach a post was when I was in bed at 6 in the morning or going to bed again at 10 p.m. That was the time when I could have a lot of interaction with posts. So I throw that out there as a challenge. I don't know exactly what the response is. But I think that it's really important to have a conversation, even if we're not going to require specific limits on after-hours working. I think we should have a requirement that it be part of the work requirement statement or the counseling sessions, or there must be some line where supervisors discuss with their employees what the expectation is. And then I want to throw out something else, ops. When you're working in a country that has a lot of attention, ops sends out these requests for comments, and you end up going back and forth about 30 times with posts and your boss and all sorts of people trying to fine-tune the language. And I wonder whether, does that really how the secretary is getting his information? I mean, is there, Is that really, what is the function of all of the ops alerts and afternoon briefings, overnight briefings, all that? I felt like that took a lot of unnecessary time. That's my thought.
Hi. Can you hear me? So two things. One is it's fine to be able to say, look, I'm going to set boundaries and not check my email every hour of the weekend. And very often your supervisors will say, that's fine, we don't expect you to. That doesn't stop the issues from being worked. So I often find myself in a situation where I'm really the person who knows most of the substance on what we're working on. Other people are playing different parts in it. And if they're more senior than me, this will continue throughout over the weekend or whatever, with or without my participation. It could end up looking very wrong on Monday morning if I don't stay involved. So even though I have permission to not be involved, I'm also, it doesn't come with, we won't go ahead without you. There's a lack of evaluation of people's substantive contribution versus just having bodies working on the issue. That's something we have to grapple with. It has to do with the division of responsibilities, which the technology has kind of broken down. The second thing I was going to say was about the time zone issue. This is something that's always baffled me about the department, even before the days of smartphones. The world is round, and some countries are on the other side of it, and yet, I remember when I worked on the Russia desk, everyone was there at 7 in the morning, and then they were there till 8 o'clock at night, so we had to spend the first part of the day talking to hospitals. And in my unit, we tried to introduce shift work, or someone would be sure to be in early and someone would be late. The department should do that. Emergency rooms do that. Fire departments do that. I don't understand why the department has always acted like this is a 9 to 5 job when it's not. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's a perfect segue to Jackie to talk about practices for supervisors and employees, issues of compensation and shift work. So Jackie.
Hi. I made a few notes here, and I looked at Jean. Also, can I introduce Jean Giuliao on she's my partner in training. She's a grievance attorney. We're working very, very hard. Every Friday, we're out at FSI to train new managers and supervisors on the overtime provisions for both exempt and non-exempt employees and how overtime and being on call, working overseas or in Washington should be handled. And a note I made here is, as far as expectations for your employees working after hours, managers must speak with their employees to set those parameters and set expectations. Good dialogue will eliminate conflict down the road. We know it's very, very tough, especially for the after hours issue, communicating back with Washington. But from what I'm hearing from some of you speaking, you feel the need to be in the loop and responding to Washington or whatever country you're communicating with immediately. And to me, it's like, unless you're being forced to do that, I mean, do you feel like you're being forced to do that? I mean, can it wait? Is it something that can wait?
Becky, I think it's a workplace culture. That need to stay connected, the theory that someone else is going to answer first, and that your boss is going to note that, and how is it going to play out down the road?
Actually, I made a note too as well on urban myths. What the culture is, what the cultural norms are. For foreign service employees, it's like long work hours are expected. But as far as who can be compensated for those hours, and Homelia, if I may put you on the spot, I just met her today, but she asked me, she said, why is it civil service employees can get overtime and foreign service cannot? That's not true. I mean, foreign service officers under Title V provisions are not entitled to overtime or premium pay, Sunday pay, holiday, night pay. But foreign service specialists, foreign service untenured journalists are entitled to overtime pay, and managers and supervisors should be aware of that. It is an entitlement. Employees, the expectation is there that the employees have to work, they have to cover, they have to answer that BlackBerry.
But unfortunately, unless that employee is ordered and approved, a lot of times when you do it on your own, and again, we teach this, I mean, almost jokingly, for foreign service officers, it's like pat yourself on the back, you're doing a good job, you're not entitled to additional compensation. But for an employee who is eligible, that should be discussed with your supervisor before performing that work. As long as that employee is ordered or approved to perform that work, and whether it's late at night via BlackBerry, after hours, they should be compensated for that. A lot of employees are not aware because of the expectation of the Foreign Service.
Wanted to add to that, I mean, at AFSA we get a lot, probably the number one question or inquiry from untenured officers is premium compensation. And it comes in, they say, am I authorized comp time for this? Am I authorized paid overtime for this? And this is a little bit of a cultural shift because previous foreign service generations did not get it. Whereas now the department is required to give it. And if you're an untenured officer and you're being required to work overtime, yes, you are entitled to that compensation or that comp time or however, under what category you fall. And this is all regulated. There's a regulation here. People don't necessarily know about its existence, but they do a pretty good job, I think, in A100 to try to tell people about some of these things. One item I wanted to go to is this idea of expectations. I think my last overseas assignment was in Calcutta. I was the Policon chief. Worked for a great consul general, and she had established a rule, an expectation, that if I need you to do something after hours, I will make positive contact with you. Positive contact, a phone call. Positive contact, a text message that you would receive. There was no expectation that you would be there to respond to an after-hours email. That was not an expectation. It was a clear, again, two-way acknowledgement. If you need something done, call me. Positive contact, text return, whatever reply it is, and that was a way to establish that expectation. I think it's really important, however it's done. We've heard several examples from the field about this, that there was that, expectation, that communication, that two-way confirmation, whatever it is, and that's kind of what we're looking towards here for the future. On the actual scheduling, I think that this is a really good, important point that Bruce raises. How do you schedule for success? The Ops Center, they learned long ago that they would need to move to 24/7 coverage with shifts. People working different shifts. People being compensated for that. Again, the Ukraine desk, they have established some shifts recently, because of everything that they've gone through. One of the issues, though, that I was really surprised to learn about is that there was an expectation for people that were working on the weekend to check their email every 15 minutes. That was a communicated expectation. We believe that's inappropriate. That, again, if you're going to require someone to be on call, every 15 minutes checking, doing work, then you need to be paying them. And that's why you have, again, principals, staffers, special assistants to department principals, sometimes they get a shift differential. And they have Saturday hours. Because, again, that's part of that compensated shift differential. But this is why the scheduling is so important. And maybe we can hear from, whether it's supervisors here in the room, whether it's the employees, what has their experience been in trying to establish any type of alternative scheduling, shift work, etc. when it's been proposed, when you've been able to do it. Some of you are, O1 office directors, and you can establish your work schedules. I want to hear from you.
So I got two. For some reason I can't hear myself. Two experiences with shift work. One, it was some time ago, but efforts to institute it in my office got a lot of pushback from people who said, "Well, I'm already doing that shift plus the extra couple hours, so you're just asking to do less than everyone else." And so without buy-in from above on the concept of shift work, got nowhere. The other experience is that a certain high percentage of people who make requests for flexible schedules, how do you put this diplomatically? There's some doubt as to how productive people are when they're not in the office on a regular schedule. And as a manager, I've noticed that the productivity goes down for some people, not others. And so I actually like having regular in-office hours and kind of wince at requests for alternate work schedules that don't have a very clear and well-defined reason, because there's a tendency for abuse in those things as well.
Another comment there on the back of the side?
Just to quickly touch on, I think we have two conversations going. One is the overtime part, which is for untenured folks and for specialists. I can speak from personal experience that I've been in a number of posts where I've just been told flat out, I don't care what the regulations say, you're not getting it. And you're not getting comp time either, so just come to work, shut your mouth, and hope for a promotion. So I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room who has been on board for 15 years or so who can attest to it. But that's a cultural thing, and I think it still needs to be addressed. I've made a commitment that I'm not going to push that down below me as I move into positions of leadership. I think that's the way to make this happen, but it still is a concern. Second, in particular for those who are not eligible for the premium compensation, tenured generalists, the problem here, I think, is that there is no uniform standard across the board as to what the expectation is. And so from one job to the next, or from one boss at your present post to the next boss who comes in after, one you started with moves out halfway through your tour, things change. And quite frequently, the experience is, well, that's my work ethic, why can't you live up to my work ethic? And without some department, minimum standard, that this is what the expectation is, and I get that we're on call, I get that we are, occasional duty officers, I get all this, but I think there really is an institutional-wide problem with this expectation, and, every 15 minutes checking your email, you might as well be in the office.
Do you think that it should be part of the requirement statement?
Yes, obviously, but again, you still, without a uniform standard as a baseline, what's to prevent every boss who wants you to be checking your email every 15 minutes to do it? I've had a boss ask me why I didn't respond to an email that was sent to me at 4:30 in the morning. I was asleep, and that wasn't a good enough answer.
Right, so again, what are those minimum standards? What ought we to be striving for? I'm just going to put this contact information up because, again, as we mentioned, this is the beginning of a dialogue that hopefully will lead to some of these things that we're talking about. Feel free to reach out to us with your suggestions. If other people contact you and have ideas, send them our way. There was another comment in the back, I think.
Yeah, excuse me, I know I've already spoken, but just two quick things. One is on the ops issue and also on shift work. I did work in ops, so we can. I'm not gonna justify any particular product or anything like that, but specifically on the shift work aspect of it. I think one of the secrets of ops is that actually, in some ways, it's rather work-life friendly, because when you're not in ops, you have no BlackBerry and you are off. And there is zero really expectation that you're going to be called in. So that's, I think, just one data point out there about shift work and how in some ways it can be rather beneficial. You may be working on nights, but you know that next morning, the moment you step out of the operations center, you're not going to be called back in, unless there's something specifically egregiously wrong with the work that you did when you were on shift. Just second, and that is on email etiquette a little bit. I think a lot of the emails we get are because people are doing things like resending a clearance request to the entire distribution list that they sent it to in the first place, which may include offices that have 30 or 40 different members in them, regardless of whether people in those offices have cleared or not. I see that sort of thing all the time. And so I I don't know the best way to sort of address email etiquette issues, but I'm sure there are best practices in terms of how email should be sent. And it touches on a lot of different things in here, and it touches on what one of the previous questioners mentioned about how email is sort of broken down different management structures within offices. I know that offices I've worked in that are extremely well run, it's very clear who answers what types of emails, whereas in other ones it's not clear, and so it results in duplicative work, and it results in people piling in on top of each other, and double, triple clearances from the same office for the same thing. I just want to put a little pitch out there for thinking about how we can highlight the right way to use email and also some wrong ways to use email.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of our colleagues from Brasilia wrote in and asked the question, why is it necessary for all of us to have BlackBerries? And she pointed out that DoD is actually evaluating who they're giving BlackBerries to, cutting out a lot of people because they're finding there isn't that need and saving a lot of money in the process.
Just a quick comment. I've worked on the Foreign Service side of the house, and I'm now on the Civil Service side of the house, so I've had some perspective on both ends, both as a subordinate and as a supervisory position. And I can say first, touching both on what management's requirements need to be in setting those expectations and what guidelines we should be developing. I used to have a BlackBerry when I was an FP nothing. I don't have a BlackBerry. I'm an attorney for the department. I report directly to a deputy assistant secretary. I don't have a BlackBerry. I'm not that important. No one is going to die if I don't respond to an email in 6 hours. How many of you can say no one is going to die if I don't respond to an email in 6 hours? It's about that expectation. And the fact that we as supervisors, any of you who are supervisors, I say this, and Jackie has sick to death because I've trained now over 1,000 managers and supervisors in the department in the last 18 months. Set the expectations, have the conversation before you have the conflict. Most supervisors I talk to say, well, I don't expect them to answer. Just because I'm on, I don't expect people to answer it. Well, use tech tools like set your send time. Set your send for 8 a.m. so that your subordinate employee isn't getting a 4 a.m. email just because you're obsessed. Doesn't mean everyone has to be. And so it's about setting the expectation, having those conversations. As employees, ask yourself, why do I have a BlackBerry? How often am I checking my BlackBerry? Not because anyone has told me I have to, or because I'm covering a post like, Uzbekistan that's exploding right now. But how many of it do it because that's our habit, because we have to step away from thinking we're that important that we need to be in touch 24 hours a day. So I think it's a combination. It's about managers and supervisors setting expectations. It's about employees being realistic as to what are their work requirements, what is obligatory for them to be on call for and in touch all the time on. And we do a lot of training on this in the civil service, and I really think it is something, knowing that the Foreign Service, it's a different boat when you're overseas. I appreciate that, having done it myself. It is a culture shift. And I think whenever I talk to groups about this, I talk about Colin Powell, who said right here in the State Department in a speech, he had a greater respect for someone who worked 8 hours a day and went home and shut it up than he did for someone who was present for 15 hours a day doing the same job. Presence is not productivity, necessarily. So I bring that up because I think there are guidelines that we can set, and for those of you who are managers and supervisors, to set that conversation, have that conversation. You will avoid these kinds of conflicts, and we will have a happier, more productive workforce.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. It is cultural, but it is also the time change and the time difference. And it's more than cultural for me, where I do press. When the Wall Street Journal calls at 8 or 9 p.m. on a Friday, you don't want to have the State Department had no comment in the headlines. So as a result, we are required to do weekend and night duty. And my question for you guys is, at what point do we as Foreign Service officer generalists get to claim the, is it 18% when we have weekend duty and evening duty?
So, and I'll let my HR colleague take this, but every bureau has the ability to designate positions that are eligible for the differential. And that is something that if bureaus are finding that there are positions that are requiring consistent amount of overtime hours, then that is a legitimate, again, supervisory responsibility. Think about how do you staff? How do you compensate? And maybe you can talk a little bit more just about that shift differential or the...
Yes, hi, that's the special differential. The department has a cap right now of 175 positions. Most of them are domestic. But there's a spring cycle and a fall cycle. And if you're working those extra hours, it's a minimum of 55 hours for the 13%, and then I think it's 60 or more hours for the 18% differential. Your office should submit a justification for the next cycle outlining the duties you're doing, the extra hours you're working, and request that differential for you.
Does duty count as work when you have to check you're expected to check at least half an hour over the weekends?
I mean, if it's part of the justification and you're working these hours, in fact, there's a 10%, 15, and 18. If you're working night hours, you would get the 10%. So it depends, again, we'd have to look at your justification. But it is possible if we stay under the cap.
So this is actually a good point. There's a really good article from a law firm that will circulate that kind of gives you an update as to how some of these things are playing in the courts. And they said that courts have found that work that takes less than 10 minutes to perform is de minimis and does not count as hours worked for overtime purposes. Now, again, if you're being found to do to check repeatedly on call, that again changes and perhaps qualifies for work per the definition. And so I think that is something that we have to start thinking about. And this is why this conversation really is a starter. When we went to FSI and we asked, what are the guidelines on after-hours work as they apply to accessibility, there are none. They did point us to one, 7 FA 1 H291, after-hours work and duty. Sounds like a great title. It applies to consular services. And I have to give a shout out to all of our consular affairs and our consular officers here in the room. They do a really good job with this in the sense that they will determine who's on duty. If there's an after-hours emergency, you'll get duty time for that. But again, part of the requirement, the FAM, or the FA rather, it says, this includes arranging with the management section the circumstances under which paid overtime would be appropriate. So again, your good consular managers, your good consular leaders will set those expectations. We'll communicate what it means. If we have Saturday work, guess what? That's going to be paid. And yes, it's not a discretionary. This is where we have gone to mission leadership, reminded them of their obligations, that it's not your choice whether or not you want to pay it. If you're requiring officers to work, they're untenured, you have to compensate them, period. And last year we had several instances where we had missions that did not do that, and we engaged as AFSA with them, and the Deputy Secretary of State called up Ambassador X, Y, and Z, and reminded them about their responsibilities. So again, I think that there's a role here for the employee, there's a role here for AFSA, and we want to be part of this conversation, trying to identify these solutions. And maybe, I know we're kind of going here on time, but I think that it would be good just to hear maybe from Jean just a little bit about this civil service overtime suit, the lawsuit that the department had to settle. This is one of the reasons why there's actually so much training and education being done because of this multi-million-dollar lawsuit that the department lost. She may not use the word lost.
I would use the word lost. I would use the word settled. So this was a civil service situation. AFSCME is the bargaining unit, is the union that represents the civil service employees. And this case has been pending, was pending since 2006. It was filed at that time. A particular law firm, in fact, the firm that was representing the union in this case, papered the city. Every government agency dropped a lawsuit in 2006 on FLSA violations, Fair Labor Standards Act. And one of the components of the FLSA that they argued is that people were working after hours and they weren't getting compensated for it. And if you're covered by the FLSA, if you are in a position that is non-exempt, then you should be compensated for all hours of work performed for the benefit of the department in excess of 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week. and I say that a lot. It's about quantity of time. So it's not about where they did the work or how was it by a BlackBerry, via fob, while teleworking in the office, coming early, staying late, working through lunch, etc. It's about, are we compensating people for all the hours that they work for us in the department? And if you're covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, you are entitled to that compensation if you perform work for the department, regardless of whether you were instructed to perform it, directed to perform it, or approved to perform overtime. And so in the last 2 years, I talked to, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of managers and supervisors about what are the duties being performed by employees, how many people are working through lunches, after hours, etc. And a big push from the department in even bringing me here to do this work is to make sure managers and supervisors are educated into what the obligations are. And so we've done, I think, a pretty good job over the last 2 years in talking to managers and supervisors about what are the requirements for their employees who are covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. The rules are different under Title V, which is the law that applies to your Foreign Service Specialist, your Foreign Service non-tenured generalists, and GS employees who are not covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, who are in exempt positions. And so about a year ago, when we started going out to the Fundamentals of Supervision course, which we do a couple times a month, and that's mandatory for all new managers and supervisors, whether you're foreign or civil service. And by next year, it will be mandatory for all of you, if you haven't taken it already. It's something that they've been rolling in for all managers and supervisors to take. And it was supposed to be an hour on the FLSA. And knowing that we had that many people who were dealing with Title V issues, I got a hold of my friend Jackie and said, okay, we're going to do it like an auction. It's going to be fast and furious. We have 1 hour, but we need to cram in all the information that they need to know, because it is a misnomer that foreign service isn't entitled to overtime. Some are. And you as managers and supervisors need to know what that is. So although this case only affected civil service employees subject to AFSCME, the ripple effect of the focus on overtime, I hope, is much more broad spread. That we are looking at it as a department. We are recognizing work-life balance and the fact that just because you're there doesn't mean you're more productive. Or just because you can answer a BlackBerry email that isn't life or death at 10 p.m. doesn't make you a better employee than someone else who says, you know what, I'll answer that at 8 a.m. because it really doesn't matter one way or the other. Now, jobs press, for example, obviously different scenario, deadlines, things like that you're dealing with. There are plenty of pockets throughout the department where urgency is an issue. And that's where I think we need to talk about guidance, not just general guidance, but what do you do in that case? Maybe you do have shift work in PA, so that you have someone who is always on for those 8 hours, and anything that comes in during those 8 hours is theirs. You have it with communications. You have it with the 7th floor communications. They work 24 hours a day. They make sure that that transfer of communications from the secretary in the White House happens 24 hours a day. Not one person works 24 hours a day. And when they leave, like the Ops Center, whatever's left is done by the next person. And so there are mechanisms by which you can do that. I hope that as a result of working with AFSCME and coming to an agreement on what was best for the department and for the employees moving forward, in that case will help AFSA and Foreign Service folks look at what kind of guidelines can they take away from it, what lessons can we learn from that, and make sure that we're protecting our employees, as well as being good stewards of taxpayer dollars as managers.
I know we're about 10 minutes over our 1 hour time limit. Does anybody else have a burning comment, question? No. All right. So as I said, and Matthew reiterated, this is the beginning of a dialogue. For anyone who is really interested in actually being a part of this dialogue and driving this process forward within AFSA, within our membership, and then taking it to the department, I encourage you to write to me or to Matthew and let us know, and we will be following up with additional meetings and outreach. Thank you all very, very much for coming. Thanks to our panelists who provided some fantastic guidance and advice. Jean, thank you for joining us today. And hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon.
And remember to vote.